Thank you for having me. I'm super sad that I'm not with you in person, but I just came back from Jamaica yesterday because I was teaching at so similar to Addis Coder, we have a camp called Jam Coders in Jamaica. So that's where I was up until last night. So okay, I'm gonna try to go through my slides and try to make sure that I don't go over too much. Um, I think so. I think when I'm looking at my slides, I can't see you all when I maximize my slides. So I can't really see the questions. So maybe if you have questions, write them out in the chat so that I regularly can. Oh, okay. So not everybody can. Yeah. So that I can regularly sort of like stop in the middle because I can't see it when I'm looking at my slides. And then we will also take questions at the end. So, okay, cool. So, so I kind of wanted to just, with this talk, give you a big picture, of, my thoughts about the current state of computer vision, its origins, and how it needs to change. So maybe you'd be reflecting this week, as you go through this summer school, um, after hearing this. And if you have any further questions, you can also feel free to contact me. So I'll call my talk Team Human Towards Community-Rooted Computer Vision Systems. Team Human is a hashtag that artists created recently, after generative AI systems that have been created that claim to replace them. So, um, so we're told that AI is a magical thing that'll make everyone's life better, right? So most of the time that rhetoric comes from the people that are really profiting a lot from building these systems. So Sam Altman, who is CEO of OpenAI, says, "I think AI is going to be the greatest force for economic empowerment and a lot of people getting rich we have ever seen." He also writes that changes coming are unstoppable. If we embrace them and plan for them, we can use them to create a much fairer, happier, and more prosperous society. The future can be almost unimaginably great. So yes, some people are getting very, very rich, but it's really not the society, as he's saying. It's actually OpenAI. OpenAI is getting a lot of money in investments. It had $100 billion valuation a bit ago. And so what is actually happening to others, right? Milagros Micheli and Adrian Williams are researchers at DAIR, our institute that Rasa just mentioned. And we wrote this paper called The Exploited Labor Behind Artificial Intelligence. This is kind of a compilation of different people's research, including ours. And of course, I'm not sure if you're aware of this Time article by Billy Perigio talking about the Kenyan workers who were labeling data for ChatGPT and also OpenAI's image generator that was called DALL-E back then. And so I want us to hear. Let me just see if I'll be able to. I'll see if you can hear this audio. Can you all hear that when I play it? So let me play it again.
Hate speech or extreme violent or pornographic content. It's partly thanks to Alex.
So that's a yes. You can hear it.
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay. You wait. You can't or you can. Sorry.
We can hear it.
Okay. All right.
Positive.
Okay. I'll play it.
Anytime you use ChatGPT and it doesn't spit out hate speech or extreme violent or pornographic content, it's partly thanks to Alex and his colleagues in Kenya.
What their contribution was basically making ChatGPT safe for tens of millions of users. They went through and reviewed really toxic, grotesque content day in and day out to make sure that no one else would ever have to see it.
Now, Alex and his coworkers are ready to talk about what they say that job has cost them.
It was very graphical. You can't start reading the text and ignore thinking of what is happening.
I had nightmares. I feared people. I feared walking in the dark.
I'm very proud that I participated in that project. Now ChatGPT is safe. But now the question I always ask myself, was my input worth what I received in return?
So this is excuse me, that clip was about ChatGPT, but they also talk about the text to image generators. And in our later events that we had, if you go to, I highly recommend that you go to this website, data-workers.org, and you can see many of them outputting research reports on this, documentaries. So actually Richard had a documentary. Mofat, who is actually not Alex that you heard over here, also has other outputs, animated shorts, all sorts of kind of information on these their lives, right? And their working lives, and how they say that they are actually the people who made ChatGPT and all of these other systems famous. They're the ones who made it safe and usable, but they were paid peanuts. And in fact, a lot of people went to Kenya from other countries in Africa and couldn't even get out once they were laid off because they didn't have enough money. They didn't have enough money to handle visa situations, etc. I mean, that wasn't even the half of it. I mean, they had such a horrible time. It was even hard reading the reports, let alone living through what they lived through. So, but this is worker exploitation, which we have done research on, but that's only one of the many harms perpetuated through the development and deployment of computer vision systems. So for the rest of the class, I mean the lecture, maybe until halfway through or something, I want to really quickly go through so many of the different kinds of harms that we can perpetuate through the development and deployment of these systems. So first of all, it's really important to understand the origin of this field. So James E. Dobson has a book called The Birth of Computer Vision that just came out last year. And so he talks about how the research directions, just the field of computer vision as a whole emerged from the military applications and also military funding. So for example, there was a lot of aerial imagery that was produced during the Vietnam War. And that's, kind of, they wanted to do certain classifications, image understanding, etc., of those aerial images. And the paradigm of how to do them was dependent based on basically what data was available and what tasks they were trying to do at the time in terms of the military. So at that time, there was also a huge resistance from with the militarization of science in general. That's the time when this group Science for the People, that's still active actually, was created. And so when these labs were involved in the military, and that's kind of how the field of computer vision was forming, these labs actually were forced out of some of these campuses like Stanford and Cornell because of this pressure, this growing resistance to militarization. So here, they were like using an iterative process of learning from the battlefield. And so the word terms like ground truth actually come from these kinds of things. And so, it was a two-dimensional problem. They have these images and they're trying to figure out to do surveillance. And then, of course, they have surveillance. And then there are things that people have to, there's the image, the 2D image, and then there's the interpretation of the 2D image by a human, like classifying who's an enemy versus who's not an enemy, etc. And then that, becomes a label. And they create a whole bunch of different systems to be able to identify those things. So even though that's the origin of computer vision, it had largely been very much an academic an academic field, an academic curiosity, except for surveillance, right? And so the currently the image recognition size is projected to be huge here. This is one estimate, 178 billion by 2030. But what has made it grow, this market size grow, is facial recognition technologies and other surveillance technologies. Most of computer vision is used for surveillance purposes. And also this does not, the market size does not include the data annotation industry, and that is the people like Mufat and Richard that we heard earlier talk about labeling data and content, moderating content. And that market is projected to reach $13 billion. And most of these companies, for instance, the data annotation companies, exist in so-called global north, right? In the US and EU. And, you know, they raise hundreds of millions of dollars, but that money does not go to the people who are all over the world labeling these data sets for them. A very recent paper that I also highly recommend that you read is called The Surveillance AI Pipeline. It's a manuscript. It's under peer review for a journal right now. It's by Ria Kalouri, William Agnew, Ababa Burhana, and a whole bunch of other people. They analyzed 40,000 documents, including patents, computer vision papers, etc. And they show that the majority of the computer vision research has been used, is currently used for surveillance purposes. And so they write here that computer vision research is perceived by many as a neutral and purely intellectual endeavor, separate from downstream impacts and applications, which is not true. So I'm going to go through a whole bunch of different things that have been perpetuated through the use of computer vision systems. Many times when we talk about harm in computer vision systems, it's been very narrow, like talking about bias or other kind of issues. But I want to show you the full scope, not the full scope actually, because we don't have time for that, but a partial scope of these issues. Let me just stop to see the chat really quickly. Okay. So a lot of times computer vision systems are used to control population movement. And that is a big hallmark of apartheid systems. So in Israel, here is an article, a report by Amnesty International that talks about facial recognition. And so facial recognition systems, I'm assuming that people know what they are, but these are systems, let's just say automated facial analysis tools. And more broadly, these are systems that facial recognition systems are systems that take an image or a photo or a video of your face and try to identify who that person is, right? Of a face, of someone's face, and identify who that person is. So facial recognition systems have been used to, they say, to fragment and control Palestinians in the occupied territories. So in order to limit people's movement, you use facial recognition and identify them. And once you identify them, you say that they can't move from certain locations to other locations. In order to train facial recognition systems, you need lots of label data or databases of a particular face and associated with who those people are. So in this case, in the case of Israeli soldiers, here this is discussed in this report that I just mentioned. They talk about how these soldiers are rewarded for the number of Palestinians they add to face recognition databases. So what happens is whoever they make it into a game. Whoever adds the more people, they get days off, they get bonuses like more money, they get vacation, etc. Here is another kind of, I'll show you another application here. It's called Smart Shooter. It's a company called Smart Shooter. I can't. Let me just see if I can share that screen. I'm gonna attempt to share that screen so we can see Smart Shooter.
We're able to see it, the video.
Okay.
But if you
Yeah,
can just play
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm gonna play. So again, let me just go back to my slides now. Smart shooter is supposed to automatically shoot you, right? If it detects some type of a person who's supposed to be shot, whether it's a specific person or some other person with some characteristic. Okay, so this is an article called AI Colonialism, and here this article by Karen Howe, and it's a series, and here it talks about South Africa. So that South Africa's private surveillance machine is fueling a digital apartheid. So there's a lot of security cameras all over, and most of these cameras are in the rich neighborhoods, right? And so the World Bank says that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world in terms of wealth inequality. And so here in this article, they say the cameras have recreated the digital equivalent of passbooks, right, where you have to have these passbooks to go from one place to another, your designated area to other areas, or internal passports, an apartheid era system that the government used to limit Black people's physical movements in white enclaves. So this is of course computer vision is not it's another way. It's people have been limiting people's movements through apartheid for a long time and trying to use their facial features to target them for a long time. It's just that now we can do this at mass scale. So this photo here is an excerpt of a photo from a magazine called Life magazine in the US. And and so they had this in the US, right? During World War II, Japanese Americans were interned. And so here, this article is explaining to people how to try and differentiate between Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans, because they're like, you don't want to target Chinese Americans, you want to target Japanese Americans based on their facial features. So they're trying to educate their readers on how to target Japanese Americans because they're apparently supposedly the enemy. But now what's happening is that this is being done at mass scale, right? Like what they're doing. Yes.
Can you just reshare your slides? Because there's your brow. Yeah, just maybe get out of slideshow
Okay.
and
There's
then
an
come
issue.
back in.
Oh, okay. I see. So, oh, yes, I see. There's an issue with the slides.
Yeah, we couldn't see the full screen.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So, let me just share again. Okay. And now?
Perfect.
Okay. So yeah, so this is happening at mass scale. So for instance, here in China is just one of many places. This is they're profiling Muslim minorities, right? By trying to see if there are facial features that they can identify with cameras and using face recognition all over. And so they have checkpoints for them, designated areas that they cannot leave. Again, which is a hallmark of apartheid, right? Is trying to control the movement of specific groups of people. Okay, so and then there's warfare. What is the impact of these autonomous systems? So here in this current war in Gaza, here are really strange kinds of quadcopters and other kinds of things we're seeing that with automated firing. And here is an article from Zakaria Zelalem, who's an Ethiopian exiled Ethiopian journalist, and Jeffrey York, and they say this is kind of the impact of increased automation of warfare, right? They're talking about across the African continent, a flood of cheap imported drones is changing the face of warfare, making it deadlier and more indiscriminate. The proliferation of easy to obtain drones, known as unmanned aerial vehicles, is fueling conflicts, increasing civilian casualties, and filling the skies with new dangers. And it's making the conflicts longer. And increasing civilian casualties. So in Ethiopia, for instance, right now, there is drone warfare using drones. A government is using drones that they buy from Turkey and the UAE. Then there's policing migration. This is one of the biggest uses of computer vision systems. You see some of the newest computer vision systems at the borders before you see them anywhere else, because when refugees are some of the most vulnerable people in the world, right? They're fleeing their own countries don't want them, and the countries they're going to don't want them. So that means you can experiment on them without them kind of speaking up for their rights. So here is a great book that I suggest that you read called Resisting Borders and Technologies of Violence. We give you a few examples. Here's the, Fortress EU, the EU Africa fortress. So this is Greece. So they have various drones and surveillance technologies to monitor the water, because if they rescue ships come and they have to rescue them. But what these people want to do is they want to do pushback. So they actually many times push back refugees back into the sea, of course, African refugees back into the sea. And essentially killing them, or redirect the ships. And so in order to do that, they have to have a lot of surveillance to get to them faster than any other, for the so-called coast guards to get to them faster than the people who want to rescue people. So they use biometrics, which is face recognition is a type of a biometric system, drones, and now this is getting very, very lucrative and privatized. And what happens is companies who are good at like the warfare or surveillance of specific groups in one place can then pivot and, also make money from this kind of border industrial complex. So here's another report called Smart Borders or a Humane World. So an example here is Elbit Systems of America, and this is an Israeli arms company that experiments on Palestinians and actually tests its systems as human tested. And it has built what they are called integrated fixed towers throughout the U.S., southern Arizona. So this is U.S.-Mexico border. Each of them has daytime night vision thermal energy cameras that can see at a distance of up to 7.5 miles. The budgets for border policing have increased from 1.2 billion in the US to 25 billion in 2019. And this is much more than they spend to stop, for example, climate change. The US spends 11 times more on border policing than doing anything to combat climate change. So here is another great report called the Deadly Digital Border Wall, and they talk about the image recognition system that this border wall, the quote unquote digital wall employs. And they say the system as designed is intended to be total. Every person, every car, every animal trekking across the desert would raise an alarm. So this is an image recognition system that is supposed to identify every person, every car, every animal across the desert. bringing border control agents and leading to more confrontations, more arrests, and more deportations. The drones flying overhead are an ever-present eye in the sky, watching people as they walk, bike, and drive in their neighborhoods. So to me, borders are the biggest apartheid system in the world, right? So instead of internal passbooks where internally you need passbooks to go from one place to another, you have external passbooks that are called passports, where you have to go from one country to another. And usually, for instance, if you're from the African continent, and you're trying to go to some of these countries like the US and EU, I don't know, some of you might have had this experience. I had a lot of this experience when I was younger. Then you can see kind of how unfair the system is, right? But to me, borders are the most normalized apartheid systems. And then we have perpetuating carceral systems and policing, surveillance, and wrongful arrests. So here I'll get to my work called Gender Shades. So in Gender Shades is a paper that I wrote with Joy Bolamini, who's a Ghanaian American scientist, computer scientist. And what we did is actually I read it when I was at Microsoft Research. So when this paper was published in 2018, I was at Microsoft Research. We looked at three automated facial analysis systems, and what these systems did is they looked at photos, and they gave you two outputs. I mean, one output of the photo. These systems try to infer the gender of the face in the photo. So they'll give you a binary result, 0 or 1, whether this that was that of a man or a woman. And we did an experiment to see by different skin shades, skin tones, right? So we put out images, what these systems would give us if we put in different kinds of images. So we found that the darker and darker the skin tone for women. So first of all, the systems had the highest error rates for darker skinned women, and almost no error rates for lighter skinned men. And the darker and darker the skin tone, the higher and higher the error rate. So for IBM, the error rate was like almost random chance. So if you just guess, with a coin toss, you just close your eyes and say, sometimes you'll say male, sometimes you'll say female. That will give you a 50% accuracy. So this is the error rates for IBM were almost random chance, 46%. So this was in 2018. It generated a lot of uproar, publicity. These companies no longer have any type of face recognition systems. IBM, Microsoft stopped doing this. Anyway, so the reason for these high error rates is because when you analyze the data sets that these systems are trained on, they're overwhelmingly lighter skinned and overwhelmingly male. Joy calls them pale male data sets. So if you look at what were called gold standards during for research for evaluating face recognition systems back then, there's the label faces in the wild data set that was 77.5% male, 83.5% white. IJB-A was almost 80% lighter skinned. ADNs was 86% lighter skinned. So, if you have your training systems that are basically better trained to recognize these kind of lighter skinned images and male people, and then you're evaluating them on those kinds of data sets, so you will never know if there's high error rates by different demographics. So when you're evaluating any system, you have to break it down and see, okay, how does it perform in this specific scenario? What about on this specific scenario, right? Otherwise, you won't know what kind of error rates you'll have. So anyhow, when we wrote this paper, we said that we worry that this will lead to wrongful arrests if police are using face recognition systems. And so 5 years later, 83% of the people who have been wrongfully arrested via the use of face recognition systems in Brazil are Black. In the US, all the cases of wrongful arrests thus far, based on mistakes of face recognition systems, have been Black. In one case, police did not even check the height and weight of the person. who they arrested, and the person wasn't even in the same city of the crime. So this is called automation bias. The fact that the police did not even check the height and weight of the person. Why? Because if they did not have this automated system telling them with high confidence that it's this specific person who committed the crime, they would have checked, they would have used their critical thinking, common sense, right? To say, okay, let's check the height, let's check the weight. Where you at the, where was he at the time of the crime? But because they have this automated system that they think is, very accurate, they overtrust it. They didn't even, it overrode their critical kind of common sense, decisions. So that's called automation bias. Um, so another thing that is happening with respect to computer vision systems is that they're being used to suppress dissent around the world. So here is a great, very extensive article looking at many different countries here in rest of world. The article is called "The Changing Face of Protest." So now, people used to, I mean, in Canada, there's been lots of protests, right? For example, recently, but all over the world, people go out into the streets and protest, and that's how they show their dissatisfaction with the status quo and a specific topic, and that's how they force change, right? Mass protests give you some type of safety in numbers. And so you go protest, nobody knows who you are when you go back to work, nobody knows, that's kind of the point of protesting. You have safety in numbers. But however, right now, people are using face recognition systems to immediately identify protesters and track them, kind of connect them to specific, like, let's say you have a face, right, of your protest, you're at a protest. They take your photo, they try to like match you with your social media account and try to find other information about you, and then it's much easier to target you. So people are starting to mass protest less because of this in places where facial recognition systems are being deployed. There's also the perpetuation of mis and disinformation. So there's many examples of this, but let me give you one example. This Indian reporter in 2018 reported on the rape of an 8-year-old Kashmiri girl. And that did not make the powers that be very happy. So they started harassing her with what are called deep fakes, right? So deep fakes are fake videos, fake kind of images. But in this case, what they do, a lot of the deepfakes are used to target women. So they edited her face into a porn video, and then they doxed her. So she said she started throwing up. Then the fan page of the BJP, which is the leading party in India, leader, shared the video, and the whole thing snowballed. The video was shared 40,000 more times. It ended upon almost every phone in India. Yes? Oh, okay. So this harassment only subsided after the United States eventually intervened. So this means that you're using it to harass journalists, so that they don't report. It's very easy to harass, especially female journalists, if they're reporting on something that you don't like. According to this article, TechCrunch article, the deepfakes are used, over 95% of deepfakes are used actually to harass women. But however, there's also another way that deepfakes can be used to perpetuate mis and disinformation. So one is, okay, if people think that, you can have a fake video or a fake story, like you can generate a fake thing using large language models or chatbots like ChatGPT, and you compare it with a fake video that is generated, or image that's generated with image generators. However, even the presence, the knowledge of that you can do that is actually really bad. So the knowledge that a fake image or video can be generated is actually used to discredit actually true things. So this is called a liar's dividend by the scholar Hani Farid. So let me give you an example. So in Ethiopia, I actually would like to see how many of you have heard about the genocide in Tigray in Ethiopia. Raise hands if you have. Okay, one person in the front. I think
It's
more
quite a
people.
lot, actually.
It's a lot. Okay, well, I'm very happy that at least a lot of people know about it, because usually many people don't know about the genocide in Tigray that has killed an official number is 600,000 to 800,000 people, but many of us believe it's actually quite over 1 million people in 2 years. So what happened during the genocide in Tigray is that so there was a time where there was a massacre called Aksum massacre in the city of Aksum at a church. Um, so right when this massacre happened, this fake Aksum massacre hashtag started to trend, and they wrote all of these what are called like blogs saying that this is fake. These are all actors, the fake video, whatever. So with deep fakes, but this is not fake, it was real. So with deep fakes, just because they exist, people can just discredit a real thing as saying that it's a deep fake. And some scholars say that that is actually more of the harm of the existence of deep fakes than the deep fake itself, right? It's not that you can generate fake stories, it's that people can discredit anything by saying that it's a fake story. Um, Other issues that exist because of computer vision systems, one of them is privacy violations, right? So let me give you an example. A privacy violation when I want to remain anonymous. And you might not think this is a big deal, but for example, when you're dissenting, when you're in a country where some you know normal stuff is illegal, when you're under persecution, your privacy is really important. So in this example, let me just really quickly drink some water. The diversity in faces data set from IBM was taken down because two people found their faces in the data set without their consent, right? And so they just scraped the data set from Flickr, but there was a law in Chicago called the Illinois in the US, the biometrics law, which does not allow people to have biometric information about you without your consent, your informed consent. So these two people found their faces in this data set, and the data set was taken down. Ironically, this data set was created to help diversify, to improve the performance of face recognition or automated facial analysis tools on darker skinned women, especially because after our result, gender shades that showed that there's high error rates there. But in the process of trying to help people kind of test out on different demographics, they then had this data set that violated people's privacy. So so this is all to say that you have to think of a holistic kind of way of addressing these harms. Especially when you're a refugee or someone who's really vulnerable, these the privacy issues can be life and death, right? They could your biometric information can be sold for profit, used by foreign countries for intelligence, used to publicly embarrass and undermine humanitarian organizations, etc. Finally, you can also have what are called allocative harms because of many of these issues, right? And allocative harms means that you don't get something really important like food or housing or something because of the issue of these algorithmic systems. So for example, here, a lot of countries around the world have started to use digital IDs based on biometric systems. So digital IDs based on your face recognition, recognizing your face, or iris scans, or fingerprints. So here, the world's largest digital ID is the Aadhaar system in India. And here they say, activists say that denial of services was linked to half of the reported starvation deaths in India between 2015 and 2018 because the system would not recognize people, or people might not have. There are people who don't have irises, right? Eyes that you can't scan. There are people who don't have limbs that you can get fingerprints from. So there are a lot of people, or the systems can just be wrong, like I showed earlier. So all these people were denied food, and instead of investigating whether okay the the systems might be wrong, etc., these people died because of being misrecognized. Like, so these can be some pretty big problems. In Uganda, there were also the government was piloting digital IDs. I think in Kenya, the digital ID was considered at some point was said that it was unconstitutional by the High Court, from where I remember. But you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But in Uganda, people, especially elderly people, elderly women, were denied essential services like healthcare, again because of the use of these digital IDs that were wrong. So the final one I'll talk about is the environmental catastrophe, right? What is the cost of the environmental cost of all of these systems that are being built right now that are really not helping most people around the world? This is a plot from a paper by Sasha Lucioni and Yassine and Emma Struble, called Power Hungry Processing, What's Driving the Cost of AI Development. It's kind of a pun because watts, our power is measured in watts. When you look at the plot, all the way at the end is image generation system. So this is a log plot, and all the way at the end, you see how high image generation. So currently, generating images based on prompts or generating videos or etc., how high the energy cost is. It is 60 times more than text generation, 1,500 times more than text classification. And so we know that this is actually, the companies are now not even claiming to be carbon neutral. Google used to claim carbon neutrality, but now they're saying that because of AI, they've stopped buying cheap offsets. Their carbon emissions are rapidly rising, and they have even stopped their carbon neutral claims. So I just tried to give you a very quick overview of all the many different issues that can occur with respect to computer vision systems as you embark on this summer school. So now the question is, what do we do about them? What do we do with because of all these issues? We don't have to settle for the current path that we're taking. How do we change things? How do we have a paradigm shift? The first rule is that we don't have to build anything, actually. We can say no to building something. We don't have to build facial recognition systems. So for example, now IBM and Microsoft both don't have any systems based on automated facial analysis tools. After we wrote gender shades, and there were all these uproars, but they didn't have to build it from the start. We have to ask, should we build something before we build it? So this is the example, right? Before, we didn't have to go through all of these tests to show that things were harmful. People could have just not built them in the first place. Second rule is that science is political. Everything we do has to be grounded in history and take power to account and grounded in specifics. So here is an example there is an amazing paper called The Moral Character of Cryptographic Work. This is by cryptographer Philip Rockway. So Philip Rockway is talking about how cryptographers failed to stop mass surveillance because all of their work was super abstract and they failed to take the real life into consideration. So one example here is differential privacy. Who has heard of the term differential privacy? Show of hands. Nobody? Okay. So differential privacy is a way to to stop if someone kind of breaks into your database, like I have a database of information. With differential privacy is a technique to make sure that that person won't be able to find information about any individual person. So what you do is you add a certain amount of noise to each entry, and the amount of noise that you add is kind of, calculated based on some theory about differential privacy. So Philip Rockway is talking about how sorry? Oh, Philip Rogway is talking about how differential privacy and many times doesn't work because the assumption about differential privacy, he says, I'm going to just read it to you, right? Most basically, the model implicitly paints the database owner as the good guy and the users querying it as the adversary, right? So if you as the database owner don't want adversaries to hack into your database and get information. And he says, but the history of data privacy breaches suggests that the principal threat to us is from the database owner itself and those that gain wholesale access to the data, for example, by theft or secret government programs. Second, the harm differential privacy seeks to avoid is conceived of in entirely individualistic terms, but privacy violations harm entire communities. The individualistic focus presupposes a narrow conception of privacy's value. Third, he says, differential privacy implicitly presupposes that the data collection serves some public good. He says, but routinely, this is a highly contestable claim. The alternative of less data collection or really no data collection at all is rarely even mentioned. In the end, one must compare the reduction in harm actually afforded by using differential privacy with the increase in harm afforded by corporations having another way to means of whitewash and policymakers believing quite wrongly that there is some sort of crypto magic to protect people from data misuse. So what Philip Rogway is telling us is that we have to consider reality, history, politics, power dynamics when we're thinking about when we build a system and when we think about harm mitigation strategies also. And third, whatever we build should be task specific instead of claiming to be general, built with domain experts and empowering those at the bottom of society rather than trying those who want to who hold power over them or try to surveil them, right? So I want to give some examples of I think systems that I think are fall in this category. So one is the cassava disease detection by Ernest Mubaze and his collaborators in Uganda. They used to be at Makerere University, but they started their own company recently. So as you might know, cassava is the second largest provider of carbohydrates in Africa. It's a key food security in sub-Saharan Africa, especially. It's a key food security crop. It's grown by smallholder farmers mostly because it can withstand harsh conditions. And with climate change, it's really important to have crops that can do that. And it's grown by at least 80% of smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. So viral disease are the major source of poor yield in cassava. And as conditions go harsher and harsher, we want high yield, right? So what the methods of diagnosis when they built this app were experts who had to travel from towns to rural gardens to visually inspect the plant and to see what kind of disease it might have. So what Ernest and his collaborators did were they created this app that tries to give smallholder farmers an ability to survey their farms and see when disease is starting to have an outbreak, and then they can call the experts once they can do like an early detection, right? So the way they do it, it's a classification kind of problem. So you have classification of disease incidence, and they use computer vision, right, and disease severity. So they first have to gather these data sets, and they can also do counting of pests on cassava leaves. So this is just an example that I think is task specific, right? It doesn't claim to solve all of the world's problems, just specific things, cassava disease detection. They gathered their data sets using domain experts, and they're working with smallholder farmers. Another example is Raseje's work, actually, which she can tell you about later, but I'll just really quickly talk about it here. This is a kind of an image of, I believe, Cape Town from 2017. So on the right, you can see townships. On the left, you can see mansions, right? So even though townships were created during apartheid, you can see that even though it's been 30 years since apartheid was legally abolished, you can still see visually the legacy of apartheid, right? This is here. So what we do is we want to segment out where these townships are because we want to understand if people's lives have gotten better if they live in townships versus suburbs. And we can't do that if we have no way to segment out the townships. And the South African government doesn't do that. They lump these two neighborhoods together into one, which would give us no way of understanding whether things have gotten better through apartheid, after apartheid. So what we do is we use these aerial satellite images to then segment out, different neighborhoods, label different neighborhoods. So like here's the image, and there's the kind of how we segment out the neighborhoods and the right. You can talk to Rasaja more about this, so I'm not gonna spend so much time on it. The third example I want to give you is synthetic data set of weapons used against civilians. So there's this organization called Forensic Architecture, and basically their whole deal is using computer vision systems to uncover issues, things that are being done against civilians. So for example, when tear gas is being used against civilians, they find out exactly what kind of tear gas, who the manufacturer was, how many tear gases were used against civilians. When bombs against civilians, same thing. So what they did here is an example of a paper called Objects of Violence, Synthetic Data for Practical Machine Learning and Human Rights Investigations. So they use synthetic images generated from 3D software to train machine learning classifiers that classified images with tear gas grenades. So this allowed them to identify the use of these triple chaser tear gas grenades and create an open source tool to help other human rights based organizations do similar types of investigations. Here's another example of a tool called Glaze that is helping artists fight back. So what this tool does is it fights back against what's called style mimicry. So right now you can have an image generator write the name of a particular artist and generate you an image in the style of that artist. And that is extremely exploitative of the said artist who spends their whole life honing their skills, their what is it called? Style. So here, this tool Glaze uses adversarial learning techniques to add some noises to the image, change the noises to the image that are supposed to be imperceptible, so that it confuses the model when you're trying to train a model to recognize a style. So these people worked with 1,100 or 200 artists to build this tool. They went to their town halls, they paid the artists, and so they really built this tool in collaboration with artists after learning about their needs, right? So to me, this is really important, a really important aspect of building anything. And the final example I want to give you is that here is this example of an app. This is an app called Oko, which basically you hold your phone on a traffic light, and it tells you whether that traffic light signal has turned red or green. So that tells people whether it's safe to cross the road. So this could be very important for blind people, right? In living in cities that are not accessible and that don't give them signals. However, one of my friends, Haben Girma, who's a deafblind lawyer, had a false positive. It falsely told her that it was red, and so she could have started to cross the street, and that would have been deadly because you would cross the street when it's not time to cross the street. So they need to do extensive testing across many areas because false positives can be deadly, right? And they need to be explicit in where exactly you expect these kinds of systems to work versus not work. And this type of documentation is really important. I've done work on, work called data sheets for data sets, model cards for model reporting. Tells you how to do extensive testing and documentation for your systems, and tell people what they should and shouldn't be used for. Finally, like I said, science is political. And this is a critique of science called the view from nowhere. So we learn about science and technology as if it's from no one's point of view. It's just objective, right? It's just objective. I'm not telling you my point of view. I'm just telling you the truth. And that's really not true. Science is shaped by the priorities of power and money and funding. So as we saw, computer vision, literally all of the research questions were shaped by the Vietnam War, having aerial images, money from the military, right? So if we really want to change things, if we really want to build tools that help our communities, we need to move away from the teaching people science and technology as if it's from no one's point of view. And so replacing the view from nowhere to explaining how power, socioeconomic policies, etc., shape the way we develop science and technologies. So finally, we should also work on, systemic change. As scientists, we can't just, bury our heads and build systems without working on systemic change. And I like this, and of course, I'd like to have funding that's not tied to the military or huge corporations. And I really like this quote by Ruha Benjamin, who says, "Remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the ones you cannot live within." And with that, I will stop because I know I went for a very long time. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Timnit, for the very insightful talk. We still have 2 weeks of learning more about computer vision. And it's always great to keep it in mind why we want to build these technologies at any point in time. So thank you so much for that. We'll take some questions in the room if there are any. Yeah, you can stop the slide so we can see it and your expressions.
Hi, my name is Sudu. I'm from Makerere Island and Makerere University. I was happy you mentioned some of the people I know in your talk. So my question is about the role, some of the roles you mentioned about some of the models that are developed to maybe track off the people privacy according to what you've been mentioning. So you said the first rule, you can say no to some of these models, and then some of the company can stop building them, like Google or Microsoft. But a question can be, if those big company refuses to build these models, and then specific countries we know, like China or Russia, really don't tend to follow the world rule and regulations that most of the people really want them to follow. They build these models and they are deployed. So what do you do about that? How as a society can behave when some part of the world are living differently the way we want?
This is a very good question, right? Because it's also the way that American US companies right now are trying to make sure that the government doesn't regulate them because they say if we don't do it, China will. And we don't, and you don't want China to build it. You want us to build it. We're the good guys. And excuse me, I don't think this kind of rat race is good. So it's kind of like, who stops good guy with a gun is bad guy with a gun kind of thing, right? If I don't build the poison, they'll build the poison. Um, Even if they build the poison, so then they'll say, oh, if we don't build the poison, the other ones, so there's like this Cold War between the US and Russia, where we had, huge nuclear proliferation, and then there was Chernobyl, which is a nuclear disaster in Russia, right? And so when we have these kind of race, like, oh, if they don't build it, then we have to build it. I think that the best thing for, even if, people don't care about the rest of the world and they care about their own society, the best thing for their own society is not to, the US military budget is I don't even know, it's like $1 trillion or something. It's some insane budget. And the US military budget could instead be used to be a healthcare budget. People can't get access to healthcare, people don't have infrastructure, people don't have any of this stuff. but they're spending all this money in the military, right? So even if China were to spend more money in the military, it doesn't help the US citizens in the US for the US to be spending more and more money in the military. And secondly, I don't buy this thing about, how uh, some countries follow the international order, some countries don't. We're seeing what's happening with the US bombing of Gaza, like into oblivion. We saw what happened with the US bombing Iraq, Afghanistan. This was against international law. This was not, in following international law. And so it's just that some countries are more powerful than others. And so what happens is whoever has the might just sort of does whatever they want. But I don't think I think this is completely unsustainable as we're seeing with the climate catastrophe, right? Something's got to give. You can't just continue to build bigger and bigger models or bigger and bigger weapons of mass destruction because you're trying to convince people that the other side is going to do it if we don't do it. I don't really think. I think we can stop and say we can stop. Everybody has to believe that we can stop. Otherwise, it's like, oh, I know asbestos is bad, right? This is like how I feel. I know asbestos is bad, but instead of banning asbestos, I wanna have it in the world because China might have asbestos too. But China might have stuff that is bad for their own people. It doesn't mean that other people should also have things that are bad for their own people. So I think that we have to kind of redo our mentality in terms of how we approach the things we should build and not build. And I'm not saying that I'm saying that if we want to say no, for example, that takes a lot of work to say no because you don't just say no and people stop building things. We say no and then we have to organize, whistleblow, worker organizing, student organizing, all of these things to stop people from building things and not just go along with it. So it's not like, you'll just say no and then, well, sometimes you say no and you get fired, which is what happened to me, right? So it's not like you just say no and things are just fine. What I mean is that the option of no should be on the table.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Mhm.
As students, when we think about projects, how do we like how do we think about mobilizing to work on projects that actually serve us that will also get funded? Like, because it's really difficult to get funding these days, and you end up working on projects that have funding, but maybe that's not what you want to work on, but you want to get maybe your PhD or your master's.
Yeah, that's what I did. I had to get my PhD. So I had to get on the project that was funded and make it into my own project, right? And then maybe learn from it. So that's a difficult question. If you have sometimes you can do a thing with funding where you kind of you have a funding for a broad theme and you try to figure out how to make your what you want to do fit into that broad theme. um so that's kind of a skill. That's a skill of someone who's fundraising, is to figure out how to fit the thing that they really want to do and sell it in the way that it sounds nice to the fundraiser, right? So some of the grants that I write are like not the way I would like to discuss a particular project, but I know that's the way they want to see it. That's the kind of language that I use. So this is a skill of your advisor usually, and or like also yourself on how to sell it to your advisor. But beyond that, I mean, I think that this kind of change happens not instantly. So for me, I worked on this project, Gender Shades, that ended up being my most cited paper on the side. I did it on the side. it wasn't my main project. I was working on something else that my advisor wanted me to work on, and this project was like on the side because I thought I wanted to work on it. And so that's how I did it. I was like, okay, I'll work on my main thing, which is the thing for my advisor, and then I'll carve out some amount of time for this side thing that I actually think is really important. And I don't know if it's going to lead to anything. I didn't know if it was going to lead to papers or anything. I just thought it was important to do. Because I couldn't fit it into whatever the funded is. The funding was for actually no, I had a different kind of scholarship at the time, but I couldn't talk to my advisor or my group mates or anything about this project. However, a lot of times what happens is students try to organize. Like when I met a bunch of students who are very frustrated because they want a specific kind of class or they want a specific kind of research direction, but the institution or the professors who've been there for a long time don't want to allow them to do that because institutions don't change easily and they're like dinosaurs. And so they created their own reading group. And then after they created their own reading group, they can maybe create their own workshop. And then after they create their own workshop, maybe that can slowly grow into a conference that you can publish in. And maybe that can slowly be an established field. This is what happened with the FACT conference, right? We literally started a conference because the thing I worked on as a side project, I couldn't publish it anywhere at the time. So I helped create a conference where I could publish that thing that I worked on as a side project to make it start to be much more mainstream than it was before. So that's why I said that whatever these rules are that I was talking about, we have to pair them with the systemic changes. Like, as scientists, we don't want to think about that. We just want to do our math or sit or code or think about the problems of segmentation or whatever. But if we only do that, we're only going to go on the status quo, whatever, path we were on before. And if we want to change that path, we have to pair whatever we're doing with organizing and all of those other kinds of strategies to change things.
Just to follow up on that, at the beginning of your slides, you were talking about OpenAI and payment of laborers, people who label data sets.
Yeah.
As students, we usually do not have a big budget. How do we reconcile needing to label data sets that we want to work on in a create meaningful work versus paying the people a decent amount that we actually don't have?
That's a really, really important question because, well, you end up doing a lot of the labeling yourself, as you know. And that's also another topic of discussion because data labeling is the biggest part of computer vision, but that's not what you learn usually in computer vision systems. One of the most important things is data labeling. So what we want to do is we want students to think very carefully, not just about the process by which they get data, but curating the data, right? Data curation, not using a huge amount of data set, but a smaller amount of data set. And if you spend like 4 out of your 5 years of your PhD or whatever doing that, and you can't publish it anywhere, then it's really hard to do that because you can't compete with other PhD students. So that means to me, the first thing to me was that you should be able to publish on your data set process. And this was something I was advocating for a long time because we can't ask PhD students to do things slowly, to curate their data sets, to think about their process and all of that if they can't publish on it and then if they can't get a job. So if recently the NeurIPS data sets and benchmarks track was created, right, to be able to have you do that. And I think Neil Lawrence was also thinking about creating a data journal. So I think being able to publish on your data set process is the big step, like institutionally, is really important because why? Secondly, what part of your innovation can be on how you reduced how you worked with your limited budget to have a specific data set. So this constraint automatically makes it such that you can't create these big, huge, models, right? That with huge amounts of data, you're already going to be constrained to a small um, small models, small data, task specific stuff. So that's already going to be a constraint. And then B, you'll have to work on other innovations to work with the budget and the data that you have. And you are going to have to do some of the labeling yourself too if you're not working with domain experts. But there's really no way around budget and having an appropriate amount of compensation for data workers, right? Like your budget has to keep in mind data workers. However, there are cases where I've seen people contributing data for free because they really do believe that this thing that you're building is gonna be useful to them, and it's gonna be managed by them in their hands. One example where I saw that was the Tehiku Media. They build automatic speech recognition models for Maori. It's a language of the indigenous people of New Zealand, right? And so they wanted to create language revitalization tools. So they created automatic speech recognition models for these tools, and they um, they had a competition where people were submitting speech accompanied data that's speech accompanied by text, right? To be able to build speech to text models, and people contributed all of this data for free to the project because they really believed in the project. But then you have to be very careful that you don't try to profit off of you try to really give back to that community, because what happened here is that this one company tried to buy this data set, to license this data set from Tehiku Media, and they said no to them. They said that, you tried to basically beat the language out of our grandparents when you colonized us, and now you want to sell our languages back to us as a service. So they said no, and they said this data has to be guarded, used and be kept in the language speakers. So this is a case where the data that they got was for free. But they made sure that the community is sort of who is governing the data.
Okay, hello Timnit. This is Raul speaking.
Hi, Raul.
Thanks a lot for the talk. So I'll jump in with a question. I was wondering, so you've been discussing a lot about the bias and the harm that is being done, and the way of using computer vision as a weapon, which is quite a clear usage right now. And I was wondering how you connect that towards the problem of digital colonization, because somehow these biases exist because most of the tools are designed by the Western white people, mostly men, by the way. So how do you connect that? And isn't it a way also to fight against this, to just push towards having the other communities, could be African community, could be other part of the world? And yes, what's your take on that? And I'm thinking specifically, for example, for the case of facial recognition, these bias would not exist if the data set were, not in the same way, right? If the data set were containing 90% Black people and 10% white people, it would be completely reversed.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to talk about not just the bias aspect of these harms, but many different ones, because the issue is that even if you had perfect face recognition, if you're using it to over police people, that's still bad, right? Like, so let's say you have face recognition that works perfectly well all the time. If it's being used to suppress dissent, so identify you when you're at a protest and like make sure track you, and then what's being done to the Uyghurs in China, or like for instance, a lot of these Chinese companies were actually trying to get more Black faces to train their face recognition models from Zimbabwe. They had a partnership with the Zimbabwean government. So if the goal is to make it better and then still use it for these things, I just don't think it'll be better for people, right? Like, okay, I was wrongful. I'm not wrongfully arrested, sure, but now I'm still over policed. I'm still surveilled. And I'm still gonna go through apartheid because it's gonna be used to identify me at checkpoints and borders and like whatever we're seeing with TSA right now. So this is why for me, it's not simply about other communities developing the same systems. It's about other communities developing other systems that work for them, right? So I don't believe that other communities should develop the same kind of tools that have been being developed so far, and then we have less bias, and so therefore we're good. I think that that we have to build different tools, different kinds of tools, and have different kinds of processes. So in terms of digital colonialism, this is very apparent in many kind of settings, like in computer vision. For example, this Senegalese artist was talking about when you try to have this image generator from OpenAI generate images of Dakar, it brings out like deserty kind of place, which is not what Dakar looks like. It doesn't bring out output images of a coastal city. Or another thing that happened is that, what's happening right now, and this is that a lot of these companies that were under fire for not hiring diverse faces, like for example, Levi jeans, were being kind of under fire for their advertisements not having diverse people, right? So instead of hiring diverse people, what they're doing right now is paying white people to create images of diverse people, image generated, and pay them. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like you don't even want to hire like the actual people. You'll pay money for the white guy who created there was one specific example called a Shudu model, and this was pre-image generators, but there's other examples with image generators. So this guy created, I actually want to show you this. I'll show you this really quickly. This guy created a model, and she looks South African. Maybe Rasaja, you can, and she's wearing the she's wearing it looks very striking, right? She's wearing the jewelry of a specific group of people in South Africa. I just want to really quickly show you this slide. Right? And so here it is. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the model, right? It's a digital supermodel. She just digitally created by this white British guy, or white American guy, I don't remember. And he's just been selling his creation, and to Vogue and to like whatever, all of these kind of companies. And so that's a great example of digital colonization, right? It's like they're not hired, the money is not going to those people, but they're using those faces to make even more money amongst themselves. You see it a lot more in language data too. The worker exploitation I just mentioned with respect to the Kenyan workers. I mean, they were not all Kenyan workers. They were all in Nairobi, but they were from around the continent. That's a great example of digital colonization, because it's kind of like, with other goods like cocoa or other raw materials. You have all of the raw materials taken from various countries, and they don't eat chocolate. The farmers that are farming the chocolate, they get very little money. They don't eat chocolate, but the raw materials are given away almost for free. And then somewhere in Switzerland, they make the chocolate and they sell it as Swiss chocolate for lots of money. None of that money does not go back to the West African countries that are creating cocoa, right? In this case, you have a similar dynamic. The people who if these workers did not exist, these systems could not exist because they wouldn't be safe. So these workers are absolutely traumatized. They can't even work right now because mentally they are traumatized. There's like drug abuse. There's all sorts of things you can read about when you go to the dataworkers.org website I mentioned. But they don't get any money. The money's not going to them. And these systems don't work for them. ChatGPT or DALL-E doesn't work for them. So it's a great example of digital colonization because they are powering the systems that work for other people without any of the money or resources going to them or benefiting them. And conversely, I mean, in addition, the environmental impacts of training and evaluating those models disproportionately affects the African continent, even though the African continent is not the one benefiting from these systems. So to me, there's many different ways in which digital colonization is happening. So if I see someone else replicating that type of worker exploitation, I don't think that's the answer, right? If I see that someone else replicating that type of environmental catastrophe, I don't think that is the right answer. But some of the systems I saw, like the cassava disease recognition or other kinds of task-specific systems where people know what the needs are of their local communities, building those kinds of systems, I think that is the answer.
Yes, there is one last question, but we'll ask the question to be short and the reply as well, somehow.
Okay.
Hi, Timnit.
Hi.
Yuri from DCL. I just
Nice
wanted
to
to
meet you.
know. Oh, pleasure. I just wanted to know, do you think it would be better that to change the incentive or, okay, for example, like, okay, the guys who make the models, okay, unfortunately, at some point, someone has to do the data annotation. The truth. So you think like, like how like Ford, when they were making cars, he made sure when they started making good cars and they started making money, he kind of made sure that they weren't working 6 days a week, say working 5 days a week. He just made sure the incentives for them to live a better life were there. So is it more like if people are actually helping build really good models, should those people also like kind of at least benefit to some point? Like, I don't know, like social welfare through AI, kind of?
Well,
So-
first of all, they should get paid. That's the whole point, is that they should not be working. They they extract so much. I mean, so I'll say that the workers answered this question extremely well on their own. So I don't want to speak for them, right? So if you go to dataworkers.org, you'll see what they're asking for. They started the first African Content Moderators Union, these people, because they're asking for better conditions. They are asking for example, if they're working on such traumatizing conditions, they need to have counselors available on the job site for real, not like, for show. They shouldn't be working the number of hours they're working, and they shouldn't be paid the peanuts that they're paying. So the problem is that, if they could pay them more, it's just that they make less money. OpenAI makes less money if they pay the workers more money. So if they can get away with paying the workers less money, they're going to pay them less money. But if they're forced to pay them more money, they will pay them more money. And if you cannot have this kind of system without huge exploitation, then you should just not have this kind of system. That's really what I think. But it's at the end of it, it's a matter of, you don't have to exploit these workers. You cannot do it, but if you can get away with doing it because they don't have a voice, then you'll do it.
Yeah, on that point, actually, that's what I kind of. One second. Yeah, one second. One second. Just on that point, like, okay, I get like paying them more is good. It's really good. It's just you also kind of okay, like it's like kind of giving someone an option or a future. You're doing this annotation work for me. If the model is really good, like 2 years from now, this portion of the profits are yours. And
That
stop.
would be wonderful. But that would be great. But I'm telling you, what happens is that if your goal is to make as much money as possible with as little cost as possible, and you can get away with that, you're allowed to get away with it, you'll get away with it, right? So right now they're allowed to get away with what they're doing. So that's why we're helping the workers get a voice. But all of these options that you're talking about, I think they're great. I think the workers probably think they would be great, but they're not getting any of that. They're getting like not even the bare minimum. And they're traumatized for life. Now they can't even find other jobs because they have PTSD. They can't, sleep. They're not okay. They're triggered, so they have to first heal. But how can you heal if you don't have money to even, feed your family? That's the situation at the moment.
Thank you so much, Timnit.
Thank you,
Round of
everybody.
applause.
Have a good 2 weeks, and I want to get back to my lecture at the end of the 2 weeks, right? Once you've learned all of your other material, once you've learned all of the other stuff. So I hope you have a good time.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.